Your papers. Hurry, we are running late.
Yes, Herr Sergeant. Everything is in order.
This is the drop point.
At midnight. Be careful near the river.
Haltet die Augen offen. Es ist eiskalt. Wir sind bald fertig hier.
January 17th, 1944. A thin winter sun struggles through the gray clouds over a quiet village in northern France. Snow clings to the eaves of shuttered homes. Smoke drifts from chimneys, carrying the scent of cold fires and damp wood. On the cobbled streets, there is only the crunch of boots on frost. A 14-year-old girl pedals slowly, her wool coat flapping around her knees. Her bicycle is old, scratched, and ordinary, the kind any child might ride. Yet in her basket lies something far from innocent, a small, carefully wrapped package, the culmination of weeks of planning. She weaves through the narrow streets with the calm of someone delivering bread, though every shadow could hide a German patrol, every echo a soldier's bootstep. Across the village, Nazi officers laugh over a fire in the guardhouse, unaware that a single, quiet courier on two wheels is about to upend their world. One wrong move, one glance could cost her life. But today, a bicycle will change everything. The wind bites her cheeks, and she pedals on, carrying the weight of history in silence. By the winter of 1944, France had been under Nazi occupation for nearly 4 years. The rapid fall of France in June 1940 had stunned the world. German forces, advancing through the Ardennes and bypassing the Maginot Line, had overwhelmed the French army in weeks. Paris fell on June 14, 1940, and the country was carved into zones. The German-occupied North, the Vichy-controlled South, and a patchwork of collaborationist administrations. Every town, village, and farm in northern France bore the marks of occupation. Black and white notices adorned walls. Curfews, rationing, restrictions on movement. Trains were filled with troops, weapons, and the relentless hum of bureaucracy. German officers established command posts in commandeered chateaus, town halls, and railway stations. Patrols moved in regular patterns, marching through cobbled streets at precise intervals. Any deviation, any hint of rebellion was met with swift, often brutal, reprisal. Yet in this rigid, fearful landscape, an undercurrent of resistance persisted. Ordinary citizens, farmers, clerks, students, and even children became couriers, saboteurs, and intelligence gatherers. Networks like the Comet Line, Organisation Civil et Militaire, and Liberation Nord organized small acts of defiance, often with minimal resources but extraordinary courage. A single act could ripple outward, influencing thousands of lives. Supplies, letters, maps, and explosives were carried in baskets, bags, or, in some cases, on seemingly innocuous bicycles. The Nazis relied on control through visibility and fear. Officers patrolled streets, interrogated locals, and implemented curfews with ruthless efficiency. Yet their blind spots were numerous. Rural roads, narrow lanes, and small villages were difficult to monitor continuously. It was in these blind spots that resistance networks thrived. Intelligence gathered from railway workers, telegraph operators, and local informants allowed the French underground to plan operations with remarkable precision. Children were not merely passive witnesses. They became invaluable messengers. Their small size, and seeming innocence, making them almost invisible to occupying forces. A 12-year-old could ride past a checkpoint without suspicion. A 14-year-old could carry messages or supplies unnoticed, blending with ordinary school traffic. These youths risked execution every day, and many did not survive. Yet their contributions were essential, forming the lifeblood of resistance communication. In towns like St. Omer, Lille, and smaller villages along key transportation routes, resistance cells coordinated with the Allies. Smuggling explosives onto trains, marking targets for sabotage, or delivering urgent messages required meticulous timing. The Germans, despite their advanced intelligence networks, underestimated the ingenuity and audacity of these young operatives. Every successful mission sowed fear among officers, eroding their confidence and forcing them to expend resources guarding every street, checkpoint, and building. By early 1944, the stakes were higher than ever. The Allies were preparing the invasion of Normandy. German forces intensified security, increasing patrols, conducting random searches, and interrogating suspected collaborators. Villagers, especially young couriers, carried heavier burdens. Each package, each message, each seemingly mundane bicycle ride could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. One misstep could provoke a deadly reprisal, not only against the operative but also against their families and communities. Amid this tense, tightly controlled environment, resistance planners began to see potential in ordinary objects: bicycles, milk carts, and delivery baskets. These everyday items could conceal explosives, documents, or intelligence in plain sight. It was an idea that blurred the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. In a world where German soldiers expected only compliance, the smallest act of cunning could become lethal. A 14-year-old girl, riding an unremarkable bicycle through a snow-dusted village, would soon exemplify this paradox. She was neither a trained soldier nor a strategist. Yet the world she inhabited, a world of checkpoints, patrols, and hidden threats, had honed her instincts. Her courage would intersect with opportunity in a way that would shock the occupying forces. The snow swirled along the streets. Chimneys exhaled gray smoke. German officers remained oblivious to the quiet, small figure navigating the winter streets. Behind every shutter, behind every alley, danger and defiance coexisted. And somewhere in this web of fear and vigilance, a single bicycle carried the promise of chaos. This tense, fragile balance set the stage for an event that would echo far beyond the village streets, altering both local and strategic realities. By 1944, the German occupation had forced every level of French society into a delicate dance of survival and defiance. Among those most underestimated were children and teenagers. They were dismissed as inconsequential by Nazi officers, assumed to be innocent bystanders, and often ignored entirely. This assumption became a vital advantage for the resistance. Schools became secret networks of information, playgrounds a cover for clandestine meetings, and bicycles, the simplest of tools, became instruments of lethal ingenuity. Resistance cells trained young couriers with remarkable attention to detail. They learned to memorize routes, recognize patrol patterns, and carry messages or small packages without arousing suspicion. Every delivery required precision. A wrong turn, a delay, or a nervous glance could result in capture, interrogation, or death. For children, the stakes were unthinkable, yet the risk was outweighed by a sense of purpose. Many viewed their acts not as heroism, but as a necessary defense of family, community, and country. In villages across northern France, Teenagers like this girl were entrusted with tasks traditionally given to adults. Their roles ranged from simple message delivery to transporting explosives or intelligence that could cripple German operations. Couriers operated along well-researched routes, often using bicycles for speed and discretion. A sturdy frame could hold concealed items, wrapped explosives hidden under blankets, maps tucked into baskets, or critical documents secured under seat cushions. The Germans focused on trains, vehicles, and official transport, rarely scrutinized the small, fast-moving riders who blended into daily life. Training for these young operatives was rigorous, though informal. Elders in the resistance emphasized observation and timing over brute force. They taught children to notice patterns, the cadence of boots on cobblestones, the time officers spent at checkpoints, the sounds of approaching vehicles. In doing so, they transformed ordinary observation into a weapon. A child could anticipate danger before it arrived, evade patrols, and ensure that sensitive materials reached their destination. The psychological burden was immense. Unlike soldiers, these youths lacked formal support or military structure. They carried both fear and responsibility, acutely aware that a single mistake could provoke deadly reprisals. Families of couriers often participated indirectly, providing cover, warning of nearby patrols, or assisting with disguises. The network extended beyond the cell itself, embedding itself within the daily rhythms of village life. This integration made detection difficult. Occupying forces could sweep a street, interrogate neighbors, or confiscate property, yet many children slipped through unnoticed. By early 1944, sabotage operations had escalated. The resistance had learned that subtle, small-scale attacks could yield disproportionate results. Railway sabotage disrupted troop movements, explosions disabled vehicles, and minor acts of arson created confusion within supply chains. Operations were calculated, timed with German vulnerabilities, and executed with precision. Yet, they were only as effective as the couriers who transported tools, messages, and devices. A bicycle could move faster than patrols could react. It could carry the equivalent of an entire sabotage kit while appearing to be nothing more than a schoolchild riding to a friend's house. Historical records show that youth participation in resistance activities was not merely anecdotal. Archives from Liberation Nord and Comet Line describe children as indispensable couriers. Reports from German intelligence occasionally note the persistent problem of young messengers, highlighting both the frustration and underestimation by occupying forces. Officers were trained to fear armed combatants, yet they rarely anticipated that a seemingly innocent child could outmaneuver their surveillance. The environment in which these operations unfolded was carefully monitored, yet inherently flawed. Villages were small, and local populations often knew each other, providing cover for resistance members. German officers relied on intimidation and procedural control, but they could not be everywhere. Narrow streets, hidden paths, and dispersed patrols created opportunities. For a quick-thinking, fearless teenager, these gaps could become the difference between life and death, and between failure and a significant tactical victory. It was in this context, a village frozen in winter, a population living under watchful eyes, and a network of young, trained operatives, that the stage was set. Ordinary objects became extraordinary weapons. A bicycle, a basket, a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Each could carry the potential to change the course of events in a single morning. And in this delicate balance between fear, opportunity, and ingenuity, a 14-year-old girl would take her place. She would ride a path that German officers dismissed, delivering a payload that would shock them, disrupt operations, and prove that courage and intelligence were not bound by age or size. The preparations were complete, the risks known, and the enemy unaware. The stage was set for a moment that would ripple far beyond the cobbled streets of a quiet French village. At 14, most children think of school, chores, and friendship. But in occupied France, some carried responsibilities that dwarfed those of seasoned soldiers. The girl on her bicycle was not a trained commando, nor a tactician versed in military doctrine. She was a child, thrust into a war she did not create, yet forced to navigate its deadliest currents. Her courage was quiet, almost invisible. Fear was a constant companion. The snap of boots on cobblestones, the bark of German orders, the distant crackle of gunfire. Yet she understood the weight of her actions. Each pedal stroke carried messages or explosives that could cripple German operations. Each pause at an intersection, each glance at a shadowed alley, required split-second judgment. Mistakes were fatal. Yet she persisted, not out of bravado, but necessity. This human dimension, the intersection of youthful innocence and calculated risk, made her act extraordinary. Resistance organizers often relied on children precisely because adults carried assumptions that a child would not pose a threat. But courage was not measured by age. It was measured by the willingness to act when every instinct screamed to hide. In a world where most people sought safety, she pedaled toward danger, embodying the extraordinary human capacity to confront fear with purpose. At first glance, a bicycle is unremarkable. 2 wheels, a chain, a basket, simple, mundane. Yet, in the hands of resistance planners, it became a tactical tool of precision. The Germans expected threats to come from vehicles, trains, or heavily armed groups. They did not expect a courier disguised as a schoolgirl. The resistance understood this psychological blind spot. Bicycles were fast, quiet, and maneuverable. They could traverse narrow alleys, avoid patrols, and maintain a civilian appearance. Explosives or intelligence could be hidden under seat cushions, within baskets, or beneath blankets, transforming ordinary objects into instruments of sabotage. Timing was critical. Couriers memorized patrol schedules, noting the precise intervals at which officers checked streets, houses, or intersections. A miscalculation could be fatal. A perfectly timed ride could neutralize dozens of enemy personnel. The tactical brilliance was not in brute force, but in subtlety and deception. By exploiting the occupiers' assumptions, the resistance turned a vehicle of leisure into a tool of war. One bicycle, ridden with precision and courage, could disrupt supply lines, destroy lives, and create a ripple of uncertainty that would haunt German officers far beyond a single village. Behind every daring operation was a network of planners, often older, experienced operatives who understood both risk and opportunity. These leaders identified the potential in unconventional agents, teenagers, messengers, and even children who could move undetected. They orchestrated the mission with meticulous attention to detail. Routes were mapped, patrols analyzed, and contingencies prepared. Packages were prepared with care, ensuring explosives were secure and messages remained intact. Leaders trained couriers to recognize danger, avoid suspicion, and adapt to unexpected circumstances. The girl's success was not a matter of chance. It was the culmination of careful preparation, mentorship, and trust in her judgment. Resistance leaders also understood the psychological dimension of their work. By using unconventional operatives, They forced the Germans into a state of constant uncertainty. Who could be trusted? Which children might be couriers? This uncertainty slowed enemy responses, diverted resources, and amplified the impact of small-scale operations. The leadership's foresight transformed a seemingly ordinary act, riding a bicycle through a village, into a mission of strategic significance. In modern warfare, technology often conjures images of tanks, artillery, or aircraft. Yet in occupied France, innovation could be deceptively simple. The bicycle itself became a technological asset, not because of mechanical complexity, but because of the clever ways it was adapted for sabotage. Resistance operatives learned to conceal explosives in baskets, under seats, or within hollowed frames. Packages were wrapped meticulously to avoid detection, sometimes disguised as bread, vegetables, or personal belongings. Timing mechanisms, when used, were compact, precise, and designed to minimize risk to the courier while maximizing effect on the target. Even a small, handcrafted device could disable vehicles, destroy supply depots, or target concentrated groups of officers. The genius lay in integration. Technology and human skill worked together. A 14-year-old girl, memorizing patrol routes and riding with precision, became a living delivery system for mechanical innovation. The Germans had vast technological resources, radios, vehicles, intelligence networks, but they rarely accounted for the creative simplicity of everyday objects wielded with purpose. In this way, innovation did not require factories or mass production. It required imagination, courage, and meticulous planning. The German officers in northern French villages were trained for occupation, control, and suppression. They patrolled streets, inspected homes, and monitored civilian behavior with the expectation that threats would come from organized resistance cells or armed combatants. Few anticipated that a child could carry explosives past them unnoticed. This underestimation proved fatal. Patrols relied on predictable patterns, assuming that civilians would conform to routines. Checkpoints were rigid. Suspicion focused on adults, travelers, and outsiders. Within this framework, a child on a bicycle could navigate unseen paths, blending seamlessly into the ordinary rhythm of village life. The psychological impact on the enemy was profound. Reports from German intelligence occasionally noted frustration at the persistent problem of young messengers. Officers who had survived combat were unnerved by the audacity of children who executed missions with precision, forcing them to divert resources and heightening paranoia. In a broader sense, the presence of these small, unexpected threats undermined German confidence, proving that occupation was not absolute and that even a single act could destabilize carefully constructed control. No historical narrative of resistance is without moral complexity. Involving children in deadly operations raises profound ethical questions. Were they heroes, victims, or both? For the girl on her bicycle, each pedal stroke carried not just explosives, but a burden of conscience, responsibility, and risk. The psychological strain was immense. Youth couriers lived under constant fear, aware that discovery meant not only death, but also reprisals against family and neighbors. Yet many accepted this risk as necessary. Their acts of defiance were intertwined with survival, of self, of family, and of a nation under occupation. Resistance leaders recognized the moral tension and sought to minimize risk, but the urgency of war often left little choice. This moral complexity deepened the human impact of the operation. Observers at the time, both civilian and military, acknowledged the courage of these young operatives, but also the tragedy inherent in their involvement. A 14-year-old was asked to navigate danger that many adults could scarcely imagine. Yet her actions had tangible, far-reaching effects. Officers killed, supply lines disrupted, and a message sent to the occupiers that no one, regardless of age, could be underestimated. January 17, 1944. Dawn broke slowly over the village, casting long shadows across frost-covered streets. The wind carried a biting chill, and the smoke from chimneys hung low, blending with the gray winter sky. The village seemed ordinary, quiet, empty of movement beyond the occasional rooster or distant dog. But beneath this calm, an extraordinary operation was about to unfold. The girl mounted her bicycle at the edge of the village, her hands gripping the worn handlebars. The package in her basket was small, wrapped in brown paper, but it contained enough explosives to devastate the officer's command post near the center of town. Every detail had been rehearsed. The timing of patrols, the gap between sentries, and the precise route that would bring her past the officers without arousing suspicion. She pedaled with controlled speed, each turn of the wheels measured. The crunch of cobblestones under the tires was masked by the distant barking of a dog. A patrol officer appeared ahead, inspecting the shuttered windows of a small bakery. She slowed slightly, adjusting her posture to appear casual, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The officer glanced up, suspicious for a moment, then returned to his task. She had passed unnoticed. Reaching the intersection near the officer's command post, she paused briefly, a signal from a hidden lookout confirming that the area was clear. With a deep breath, she moved forward. The officers were engaged in morning routines, laughing, smoking, unaware of the danger that had quietly arrived at their doorstep. The package in her basket rested lightly against her knees, indistinct and innocuous. In mere moments, it would become an instrument of devastation. Timing was everything. At 8:17, she released the concealed mechanism that would trigger the explosives. A soft click, almost imperceptible, marked the moment. She pedaled away calmly, blending into the alleys, her eyes fixed ahead. Seconds later, a sudden roar shattered the morning calm. Flames and smoke erupted from the command post, throwing officers to the ground. The blast was precise, the result of careful calculation and courage under unimaginable pressure. Chaos ensued. Officers scrambled, shouting orders, attempting to organize a response, but confusion reigned. The explosion had not only caused physical destruction, but shattered the illusion of safety the Germans had cultivated. Every assumption that children were harmless, that patrols could maintain order, that villages were controlled, crumbled in the span of moments. Nearby villagers watched from behind shuttered windows, some frozen with fear, others barely daring to breathe. The operation's success depended on stealth, but the impact could not be concealed. Dozens of officers were killed or injured, their plans disrupted, their confidence shattered. The girl, riding her bicycle away from the scene, remained composed, her small figure disappearing into the winter haze. She carried not just the echo of the explosion, but the awareness of what had been accomplished and what might yet follow. The immediate aftermath was a blur of smoke, confusion, and alarm. German communications were flooded with reports of the attack. Officers attempted to regroup, seeking explanations, while resistance members silently observed the results of weeks of careful preparation. The operation had demonstrated a fundamental truth. Audacity and intelligence could overcome even the most powerful occupiers, and courage was not bound by age. The girl had completed her part, but the reverberations of her actions had only just begun. German forces would now scramble to understand the source, reassess security, and contend with a new reality, that the resistance, including its youngest members, could strike with precision and lethal effectiveness. This decisive morning, quiet yet catastrophic, marked the turning point in the village's history. A simple bicycle had carried more than explosives. It had carried the message that oppression could be challenged, that ordinary objects, combined with extraordinary courage, could achieve extraordinary consequences. The explosion left a deafening silence in its wake, broken only by distant shouts and the crackle of fire consuming the officer's command post. Smoke poured into the winter sky, curling in thick gray plumes that could be seen across the village. Windows shattered, doors splintered, and nearby structures trembled under the blast. The carefully orchestrated schedules of German officers had been obliterated in an instant. Those who survived the initial detonation stumbled into the streets, dazed and disoriented. Panic spread rapidly. Officers barked orders, but confusion reigned. Communication lines had been severed, and the sudden destruction of their command hub left them without leadership. Patrols were misdirected, checkpoints abandoned, and the illusion of absolute control shattered. For a brief, chaotic moment, the occupiers were not the hunters. They were the hunted, scrambling to regain composure in the aftermath of a strike they never saw coming. The girl, small and inconspicuous, pedaled away through back alleys and side streets. Her heart raced, but her movements were controlled. She had rehearsed every turn, every shadow, every pause. Patrols passed moments after she had gone, oblivious to her presence. In her basket, only an empty wrapper remained, the evidence of her mission gone as quickly as it had arrived. The winter wind carried the faint smell of smoke and gunpowder, a reminder that the operation had succeeded with lethal precision. Nearby villagers emerged cautiously from their homes. Many had heard the explosion, but had been too fearful to move. Now, faces pressed against shutters, they saw the destruction firsthand. A small group of resistance members watched from hidden vantage points, their expressions a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. The mission had cost nothing in human life for the resistance side, yet it had achieved devastating results. Dozens of officers were dead or wounded, and the psychological impact would reverberate far beyond the village streets. German intelligence reacted swiftly, but with confusion. Reports flooded higher command. Explosions, casualties, and the unprecedented involvement of children as operatives. Officers scoured the village, interrogated residents, and attempted to trace the origin of the blast, but the combination of planning, timing, and stealth ensured that no immediate culprit could be identified. The very tools of the occupation, the patrols, the checkpoints, the watchful eyes, have been circumvented by ingenuity and audacity. The local Nazi command recognized the severity of the blow. Security measures intensified almost immediately. Patrols were doubled, curfews extended, and checkpoints fortified. Officers ordered thorough searches of every household, every shop, every alley. Yet the girl had disappeared into the anonymity of the village, her identity and involvement hidden by design and circumstance. Every attempt to predict her movements was futile. Her youth, her size, and the simplicity of her bicycle had made her invisible where others would have been caught. For the resistance, the operation became both a tactical and symbolic victory. It demonstrated that careful planning, courage, and clever use of everyday tools could achieve results far beyond what conventional operations might expect. The act itself was small in scale, one girl, one bicycle, one package, but its effects were monumental. Officers killed, enemy confidence shaken, and the broader German occupation forced to reconsider the threat posed by ordinary civilians and, in particular, their youngest members. In the hours and days that followed, the village was transformed. Streets that had once been patrolled with routine and confidence now felt tense, uncertain. The Germans moved cautiously, aware that any corner, alley, or child might conceal danger. And yet, the girl remained unrecognized, her role secret, her courage unrecorded in German logs except as a fleeting, inexplicable phenomenon, a warning that even innocence could be lethal. This turning point, the convergence of planning, courage, and audacity, would resonate beyond the village. It became a case study in the effectiveness of unconventional warfare, a moment where psychological, tactical, and human factors combined to overcome superior firepower and institutional control. The explosion was not merely an act of destruction. It was a signal. Occupation was not invincible. Resistance, no matter how small, could strike with precision, leaving the enemy both physically damaged and psychologically unmoored. The girl had returned to the quiet anonymity of her home. The weight of her actions settled on her shoulders. Outside, the village was still, the smoke rising as a testament to what had been accomplished. German forces scrambled to respond, but the initiative had shifted. In one morning, in one strike, a 14-year-old had altered the dynamics of power in a small corner of occupied France. The smoke over the village lingered long after the blast, a gray testament to the precision and audacity of a single act. German officers who survived scrambled to account for the chaos. Reports filed later described the event in terms of confusion, frustration, and disbelief. Estimates indicated that dozens of officers were killed or severely injured, including members of the local command unit responsible for enforcing occupation. Entire administrative routines were thrown into disarray. Schedules, patrol rotations, and communication lines had been disrupted simultaneously, revealing the vulnerability of even the most controlled environments. The German response was swift and brutal, though often misdirected. Patrols swept streets multiple times a day, searching for anyone acting out of the ordinary. Homes were ransacked, bicycles inspected, and villagers questioned under threat of violence. Yet the girl remained undetected. Her youth, unassuming appearance, and the ordinary nature of her bicycle had shielded her, exploiting a blind spot the Germans never anticipated. The success of her mission forced German officers to confront a reality they had long ignored. Resistance could come from the most unlikely places, and even children could be instruments of lethal action. Meanwhile, the morale of the resistance soared. Local cells recognized the impact of the operation immediately. What had been a small, precise act of sabotage became a symbol of audacity and ingenuity. For the villagers, it was proof that the occupiers were not invincible. Couriers, operatives, and even local children understood that careful planning and courage could yield results far beyond their size or apparent strength. Allied intelligence took note as well. Reports sent to London highlighted the creative methods employed by the French resistance, especially the use of youth as couriers. The operation demonstrated the tactical advantage of blending ordinary life with covert action. Bicycles, once mundane tools of transportation, have become instruments of disruption capable of altering local power dynamics. The act also illustrated the importance of precise timing, planning, and local knowledge in operations that could not rely on sheer force. For the German command, the psychological impact was as significant as the physical damage. Officers questioned their assumptions about control, underestimated the role of civilians, and were forced to divert additional manpower to routine patrols and security measures. Villages once considered secure became zones of suspicion. Every child, every cyclist, every ordinary activity was now a potential threat. The operation had introduced uncertainty and fear into a system that relied heavily on predictability and intimidation. Propaganda within the German administration attempted to downplay the event. Reports emphasized that the explosion was isolated, labeling it a minor act of sabotage. Internally, however, officers documented the method, noting the unusual involvement of a young girl, and raised concerns over the potential for further undetected attacks. Resistance leaders, meanwhile, celebrated the ingenuity, recognizing that small, low-risk missions could have disproportionate effects on enemy morale and operational stability. The immediate aftermath also carried practical consequences. The command post destroyed in the explosion required weeks to rebuild. Administrative records, personal documents, and operational plans were lost, creating confusion that slowed German enforcement and disrupted patrol schedules. The loss of officers created a temporary vacuum in authority, further emboldening resistance networks. Local intelligence and communication were momentarily uncontested, allowing additional operations to proceed with reduced risk. Yet the operation was not without weight on the girl herself. Though her success was absolute, the psychological burden of having killed, injured, or indirectly caused the deaths of dozens of soldiers was immense. Youth couriers often carried trauma silently. The act of courage, celebrated by the resistance, was shadowed by the moral and emotional consequences inherent in war. This duality, the combination of tactical success and personal cost, would remain a defining feature of her story. By the end of that day, the village had returned to an uneasy calm. Smoke still drifted from the smoldering ruins of the command post. Patrols moved more cautiously, and villagers whispered of the audacity that had struck the occupiers without warning. The Germans had been humiliated. The resistance had been emboldened. And a 14-year-old girl, riding her ordinary bicycle, had become an agent of change in a war dominated by adults, machines, and strategies of overwhelming force. In the weeks that followed the operation, the impact of a single bicycle ride reverberated far beyond the village streets. German officers, already stretched thin by the war effort, were forced to reassess not only security protocols, but also the very nature of resistance. Villages once considered low risk were now treated with heightened suspicion. Every child, every pedestrian, and every ordinary vehicle became a potential threat. The psychological burden of uncertainty slowed patrols, diverted resources, and eroded confidence. A victory of fear and perception as much as of explosives and planning. The destruction of the command post disrupted administrative operations for months. Supply schedules, troop deployments, and communication lines were delayed, creating gaps that other resistance cells exploited. Intelligence gathered from the aftermath indicated that officers were hesitant to move, leaving openings that allowed additional sabotage and message delivery with reduced risk. Resistance leaders noted that careful, low-profile actions, when executed with precision, could create cascading effects far beyond their immediate objectives. This operation also influenced Allied understanding of occupied France. Reports from liaison officers in London highlighted the ingenuity of resistance methods, particularly the use of young couriers. The mission became a textbook example of asymmetric warfare, leveraging minimal resources, blending into ordinary life, and exploiting enemy assumptions to achieve outsized results. In operational briefings, planners emphasized the value of mobility, timing, and deception, elements exemplified by a single girl on a bicycle carrying her lethal cargo. Locally, the morale of both the civilian population and resistance members soared. People who had endured years of occupation recognized that courage, ingenuity, and careful planning could make a tangible difference. Young operatives were celebrated quietly, their acts reinforcing the principle that age and size did not define capability in a clandestine war. Stories of the bicycle mission spread through underground networks, inspiring other couriers and cell members to attempt similarly daring operations, confident that intelligence and daring could outmatch brute force. The Germans, by contrast, experienced not just practical disruption, but lasting psychological effects. Officers questioned their assumptions, underestimated the creativity of ordinary civilians, and were forced to implement ever stricter controls. Villages were patrolled more heavily, checkpoints multiplied, and curfews enforced with greater rigidity. Yet these measures often proved counterproductive, alienating the population and strengthening the resolve of those willing to resist. The operation demonstrated a fundamental truth. Fear could be weaponized as effectively by the occupied as by the occupiers, especially when courage intersected with ingenuity. The human cost, however, remained profound. Though the girl survived, many young operatives faced immense emotional strain. Carrying out lethal missions at an age most children spend in classrooms imposed a weight of responsibility and trauma rarely acknowledged at the time. Resistance leaders took measures to provide guidance and support, but the psychological scars endured, shaping the lives of these youths long after the war. Their courage was extraordinary, yet inseparable from the grave moral implications of using children in deadly operations. By the summer of 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy would further transform the theater of war. Operations like the bicycle sabotage had already weakened German control at the local level, eroded confidence, and trained both occupiers and civilians to expect unpredictability. The groundwork laid by resistance missions, particularly those executed with precision, creativity, and daring, amplified the effectiveness of conventional military actions. One girl's courage had contributed to a broader strategy of destabilization that made the occupiers' grip more fragile in the months leading to D-Day. The village itself would carry the memory of that winter morning long after the war. The ruins of the command post were eventually rebuilt, but the story of a small figure pedaling through frost-covered streets, carrying a package that killed dozens of officers, became emblematic of resistance ingenuity. In historical records, intelligence reports, and personal memoirs, the incident is cited as a remarkable example of how ordinary objects and underestimated actors could achieve extraordinary results. In every sense, the operation transcended the immediate blast. It altered strategies, influenced morale, reshaped perceptions, and created ripples that extended far beyond the confines of a single village. The courage, intelligence, and audacity of one 14-year-old girl had proven that even in the darkest, most controlled environments, innovation and bravery could strike fear into the heart of an occupying power. History often remembers the grand battles, the generals, and the machines of war. Yet sometimes it is the quiet, seemingly insignificant acts that leave the deepest mark. The story of a 14-year-old girl on a bicycle is one of those moments. In her simplicity, in her courage, it reminds us that warfare is not only about armies or firepower. It is also about ingenuity, audacity, and the human spirit. The bicycle, ordinary in every way, became extraordinary in context. It carried more than explosives. It carried the weight of resistance, the hope of a people, and the courage of youth. It demonstrated that the most underestimated actors, when guided by purpose and intelligence, could change outcomes thought predetermined by force alone. The Germans' assumptions that children were harmless, that routine ensured control, were shattered in an instant. One small act reverberated far beyond the cobblestone streets of a winter village, destabilizing an entire system of occupation. Yet there is a quiet tragedy woven into this triumph. The girl bore the responsibility of lethal action at an age when most are shielded from the world's cruelty. Her bravery is inseparable from the moral complexity of war, which asks the innocent to shoulder burdens no child should ever face. Resistance demanded courage, but it also demanded sacrifice, and the psychological weight of such acts endured long after the explosions faded. In the end, this story is both tactical and human. It is a lesson in the power of audacity, the effectiveness of innovation in small hands, and the unpredictable ways courage can manifest. It reminds us that history is not written only by generals or machines, but by ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. One girl, one bicycle, one winter morning, her actions echo through time. They testify to the profound impact of courage, intelligence, and determination, even in the smallest packages. In that fragile balance between fear and resolve, between innocence and consequence, history found one of its most improbable, yet undeniable heroes.